What's up guys, my name is Ace, and Season 3 for Battlefield 6 is coming next Tuesday on May 12th. And today we got the full patch notes for all of the changes and fixes that we can expect to see with that update. And as always, there's a lot going on here, and it would take far too long to cover literally every single one of these details. So as always, instead of covering literally every single edge case bug that was fixed with this update, I went through and picked out the highlights of the things that will actually impact your experience on a game-to-game or moment-to-moment basis, or in some cases, just some things that I find to be quite interesting. And let's just dive right in with the player section. One interesting thing here is they're increasing the critical assist window from 1.5 seconds all the way up to 3 seconds. And for those that aren't aware, a critical assist happens when you deal a bunch of damage to an enemy player and then your teammate finishes them off. In those cases, instead of just getting a regular assist and getting the XP for a regular assist, it gives you a critical assist, which gives you full XP as if you got the kill, but you won't be awarded with the kill, your teammate will. So after this update, it's going to be more forgiving for those critical assists. Next, another thing I found interesting is after this update, when you jump from a moving vehicle, you will now properly inherit the velocity of the moving vehicle, as you should. And that should just make things feel a little bit more natural. I wonder if that also means you'll be taking damage if you jump from a very fast moving vehicle, since you'll now be impacting the ground and things at a higher velocity. That's definitely something worth testing once the update comes out. Then for the engineer class, we saw some field specialization passive skill adjustments. The first thing is for devastating impact. This is the one where damaging enemy vehicles will reduce their repair effectiveness. Currently, it's a 50% reduction to their repair effectiveness. After this update, that's going to be cut down to just 25%. Then on top of that, they also nerfed the overheat control vehicle weapon effect from 50% down to 10%, so a pretty big nerf there. And they're also replacing the vehicle regeneration passive skill with a mine sweeping skill instead. And what this will do is it'll highlight any mine that's within a 30-meter area around you. As for the next thing I'm quite happy to see here, they've corrected an issue where enemy weapons could appear sideways and not properly aligned with their aim direction when in certain states, such as jumping. And that's something I'm sure many of you guys have experienced. Somebody jumps around the corner, and from your perspective, the gun isn't even aimed at you, and yet you're taking damage from shots that are coming out of that gun sideways. And while it is a purely visual and animation thing, it can still be frustrating when impossible-looking things like that happen to you. After that, the incoming damage UI indicators are now going to be animating and scaling based on the amount of damage that you're taking. So that'll just improve clarity of rapid consecutive hits, and it also makes it easier to distinguish between low and high damage. And I think that's great. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what this looks like. Another thing that's kind of similar to that is when you take damage while aiming down sight after this update, it's now going to trigger a hit reaction that moves your weapon opposite to the direction of impact. So if you get shot from the left, it'll move your gun to the right. And this is designed to improve damage feedback without interfering with the outcome of gunfights. So it does appear that your actual point of aim won't be affected by this, or at least any more than it currently is. And it's just going to be a purely visual movement of your gun. And that covers it for the key points from that first section. Now let's talk about vehicle stuff. And there's a lot of vehicle stuff. This is like the vehicle update. And I'm going to cover these to the best of my ability, keeping in mind I'm not a big vehicle player, primarily infantry. So my understanding of all the intricacies of vehicle play is fairly limited, but the first thing to point out here is jets and helicopters will now have an indicator on their HUD that shows whether or not they're currently protected by being below the radar, and that just seems like a no-brainer indicator to have. Next, they're reworking angle and zone damage, and this is something I have covered extensively in the past, showing all of the different damage values for all the launchers, as well as their zones and angles, and how that would change things. But basically with this update, they're simplifying the system a bit to improve consistency and predictability. So now with this, damage to the turret of a tank will always deal 75% damage. Damage to the body of a tank will always deal at least 100% damage. So it's not going to dip below that if you have a really extreme angle. However, hits from a favorable angle from the side of the tank will deal 150% damage, and to the rear of the tank, favorable angles will deal 200% damage. So there is still an angle component that will be present. They're just keeping things a lot more simplified and consistent. Now on top of that, they mentioned weapons will no longer deal different damage values to IFV, MBT, APT, and AA vehicles. And instead, MBT health has been increased to 1200 and APT health has been reduced to 800. Next, we've got a rework to regeneration brackets in vehicles. So currently, the armored vehicles have different brackets of health, and that's no longer going to be the case. They're not going to be split up into various brackets. Instead, you're just going to have a critical health bracket and a standard health bracket. On top of that, your regeneration delay is increased from 6 to 12 seconds but you can now regenerate to full health instead of only to the next health bracket like you currently have. Additionally, they've doubled the regeneration rate, and now if you take critical damage, so you're in the critical health state, your regeneration is going to be slowed by 80%, so it will regenerate a lot slower, but that's an improvement because before this update, you won't regenerate at all in critical health. So a little bit of give and take here, but overall, I would say a buff. If you back away from the fight and you stop taking damage for 12 seconds, you now have the potential to fully regenerate your vehicle, even if it's in a critical state. Next up for vehicles, we have a bunch of handling changes that were made. So they're updating all tracked vehicles with a new transmission and steering system for a smoother and more responsive acceleration and turning. Tank-type vehicles will no longer be immobilized by taking high damage, although anti-tank mines will still immobilize the tanks. Then the ground vehicle boost bar is no longer emptied when interrupting boost, and that boost can now be reapplied even when the bar is recharging unless you've fully depleted it first. After that, the turret speeds for the MBT and IFV have been modestly improved, and aiming in first person and zoomed views on the tanks has been tuned to be faster and more responsive. After that, there's a big section on vehicle weapons, and I just want to point out at the beginning, I'm not going to go through all of these, largely because the notes are just stating what the values have been changed to, not from. And as a result, since I don't have all of that data on hand, I don't even know if these are nerfs or buffs. And so me just reading through these notes wouldn't really mean anything since I don't have any context surrounding them to tell you if these are buffs or nerfs. In saying that though, some general changes they made here is for lock-on weapons, they'll now always deal consistent damage, and they will completely ignore zones and angles on vehicles. So zones and angles will be reserved for manually aimed weapons. And then they also said for most land vehicle explosive weapons, they'll now have a minimum explosive damage of 20%. So this doesn't have an impact on your one-hit kill range or anything. It just means that at the edge of your explosive radius, you're now going to be dealing no less than 20% damage just to make things more consistent. After that, when it comes to vehicle equipment, the reinforced plating passive has been removed, and instead they've replaced it with contingency systems. So what this means is you can no longer increase the damage resistance of your vehicle. That also means it doesn't increase the weight of your vehicle and reduce the speed. And instead, with that new contingency system, when at low health, this will accelerate the cooldown of countermeasure equipment. And this change should make counterplated vehicles just more consistent across the board, since they won't be able to get that increased damage resistance. Now, additionally with vehicle equipment, the thermal smoke got a handful of updates. The first thing is they increased the active duration by 3 seconds. They made it so it will now block the acoustic sensor AV mine from detecting the vehicle when you activate this. They've also reduced the cooldown of the smoke screen from 20 seconds down to 16 seconds. And they also made it so the smoke will deal moderate damage to nearby enemy infantry who remain in the cloud. And very importantly here, this damage will also destroy C4. So that acts as a nice counterplay to those recon players that run up on you with C4s, if you happen to be using thermal smoke. And then finally, they mention while remaining inside of your thermal smoke, all hits will be registered as minimum damage hits at 75%. So those are a bunch of really nice improvements to thermal smoke. And now we can move on to the gadgets section. Most of these are surrounding vehicle play as well, but not all of them. First thing to mention here is for the acoustic sensor AV mine, they added a warning indicator when the submunition launches, so when it triggers and launches that projectile up in the air, and that may give you a little bit of time to react. They've also corrected an issue preventing the supply crate from resupplying soldiers inside vehicles. They corrected an issue where deploying a tugs would always switch players back to their primary weapon instead of the previously equipped item. They also corrected an issue with the incendiary airburst where it would sometimes fail to properly detect and damage targets inside its burning smoke cloud. Then for all of the player-controlled gadgets, including portable mortar, recon drone, laser designator, and the EOD bot, they will only begin resupplying once the deployed gadget has been destroyed. So you don't get to charge up your next one as you're using the current one anymore. After that, for the acoustic mines and the anti-vehicle mines, they will no longer trigger for light transport or personal transport vehicles. And they've tuned the Claymore detection arc to better match the visible laser beams. Then for C4, they've actually buffed the damage values against tanks and helicopters. Previously, a C4 would only deal 334 damage to a tank. Now it will deal 350 damage. So that should just make it a more consistent 3-hit kill, especially if you've got an engineer that's currently repairing it. That would often be enough to protect your tank from that third C4 finishing the job. Then for the M136AT, they will now deal 207 to 550 damage against tanks. And this is a nerf, so now it's possible that this will take you up to 5 hits to kill a tank rather than the previous 4 maximum hits. Although we still do have a 2-hit kill potential. Then they updated the engineer supply crate so it no longer has limited supply charges in standard multiplayer. They've also updated the Claymore's base close range damage from 65 to 50, and they made it so damage drop-off will start at the edge of the detection arc. Another big thing they've already confirmed and talked about a little bit, but they have it included here. For the portable mortar, the shot dispersion is increased as you increase your range. So the longer the distance away from your target, the less accurate your mortar is going to be. Then for the acoustic mine against a tank, previously we would deal 476 damage, now we're dealing 480 damage, so not much of a difference there. Whereas for the RPG, they've updated it to now deal 173 to 460 damage against tanks. And this means we will no longer have a 2-hit kill potential against a tank with the RPG with that perfectly lined up rear shot. It's going to take you at least 3 hits to kill it. Now, moving on to the AV mine, there were a few adjustments made here. First off, damage against tanks has been updated to 390, and that's way down from when I tested back in the day, at least at 770. Perhaps it changed somewhere in between there, but now it is going to take you 3 AV mines to take out a full health tank. On top of that, deployment will now only be blocked inside enemy HQs. They also increased the maximum number of mines that can be placed from 6 up to 9, and they removed that recent addition of the 3-minute timer on the AV mine, so once you died 3 minutes later, all your AV mines would disappear. That won't be happening anymore. It will also now display a warning if you attempt to place the AV mine in an out-of-bounds position. And mines will now have glint at close range to help people distinguish from the level props and debris. So it's going to be easier to spot them. Then getting into some of the launchers, for the SLM-93A, the base lock-on range has been reduced from 650 to 550 meters. They've also updated the damage on that, and they've reduced our projectile speed from 540 meters per second down to 480. Then for the Igla, we now deal 200 damage against tanks. They've reduced the lock-on time from 1.2 to 1 second, although they've also reduced our missile speed down to 480 meters per second. However, the acceleration on our missile has been increased. Next, for the M4A1 SLAM, or the tripwire mine, it can now be triggered regardless of vehicle movement speed, whereas previously, if vehicles slowed down, it wouldn't trigger one of these. They've also slightly reduced the amount of damage we deal to tanks, although it is still a 3-hit kill for underbelly hits. Also, you get that warning if you try to place it in an out-of-bounds area. And then finally, there is a short arming delay before it becomes active when you place it. As for the MBT law, the damage against vehicles has been updated to 240 against tanks, and that's a reduction, so it will now take you 5 hits to kill a full health tank, rather than the previous 4 hits to kill a full health tank. But with that, they also increased the initial speed and acceleration of the MBT law's projectile, and that should make hitting targets just more consistent overall. Then when it comes to the 148 Glaive, they've actually buffed the amount of damage we deal against tanks from 350 up to 465 damage. So it's still a 3-hit kill, but it's going to be a more consistent 3-hit kill, and also after 2 hits, you're going to have it very low health. On top of that though, they reduced the lock-on time from 1.8 down to 1.4 seconds. They increased the maximum missile speed by 10 meters per second, and they increased our starting ammunition from 2 to 3. So those are a handful of nice buffs to the Glaive. After that, for the Laser Designator, the effect duration has been reduced from 20 seconds all the way down to 9 seconds, so very big nerf there to the overall duration. On top of that, the Laser Designator will no longer reduce lock-on time for anti-air missiles, and instead, this will now provide a consistent 20% increase to lock-on range across all locking weapons. And that will also apply to vehicle-mounted Laser Designators. So generally a nerf to the Laser Designator, but also a little bit of a rework there. Then for the EOD bot, the EOD mines that you can drop saw a damage reduction from 418 to tanks down to 300, so it's now going to require 4 of these to take out a tank. These mines will also no longer trigger for light transport and personal transport vehicles. Also, just like with the AV mine, these will now have a glint to them at close range, so it'll help people spot them easier. And they've increased the stack prevention radius from 1.5 meters to 5 meters, so you do have to spread these out a lot more, making it less likely that you can stack damage with them. And then another big change to the EOD bot is it will now self-destruct when its out-of-bounds timer expires, or when you stop controlling it if it is out of bounds. And that's to prevent an exploit that's currently available where you can stay out of bounds indefinitely with the EOD bot as long as you keep exiting the control screen and then going back before the time expires. After this update, you will no longer be able to do that. Then for the hardware suppression system, they made it so you can no longer target enemy gadgets through walls and at a long distance, although you will still get limited wall penetration at closer ranges. But that works much more along the lines of how I would expect this to work. It was kind of crazy that this did work so well through walls. But with that adjustment, they also updated the maximum range back to its original value, so the range is going to be a lot better. You just now generally need line of sight. And then finally, they made it so it no longer intercepts the M320 projectiles, but it will still target other launcher projectiles. Then getting into the weapon section here, they're adding shotgun speed loaders as a magazine attachment. They're also adding a magnifier as an optic accessory. A big thing that's happening is they're increasing the recoil for high DPS automatic weapons. And then they mentioned they're also slightly increasing recoils for all automatic weapons. So it looks like the high damage weapons are going to be hit the hardest, but all of the full autos are going to have increased recoil. And this is something I will be covering in great detail next week with before and after comparisons. After that, a few other vehicle additions here. They are adding a threat indicator for jets and helicopters, and that will appear when a nearby enemy jet has your vehicle in its sights. And then on top of that, they also added a new threat indicator that highlights incoming aim-guided missiles. So that'll give pilots an improved ability to spot and react to them. And then finally, we did mention earlier, they added an air vehicle below radar UI indicator. Additionally, for audio when it comes to this, they added distinct sounds depending on whether you're being locked on or just painted by an enemy player. So that'll just help readability with those situations. Another thing that I'm sure some people are going to be happy to see, although maybe it's not taking it far enough, they corrected an issue where the new marker didn't disappear after highlighting a new weapon package. I didn't see any word on the orange dots though, and I know that's a big complaint from a lot of people in the community, as those orange dots are just everywhere and they don't always disappear when you hover over the items. It would be nice to just have like a clear all button with that as well, so you could get a fresh start. In either case, on top of that, another miscellaneous thing is they improved ping responsiveness and consistency. And they're making it so there's less of a delay when you try to ping something. And that definitely sounds great. I'm excited to get my hands on that. And then something else they mentioned here is they updated weapon attachment costs and visual ordering across multiple weapons. And I really wish they would have gone into more detail here, because this is very vague and it's going to be very difficult to track down all of the changes. But it looks like they're updating the cost of some attachments on some guns. Then a few key audio adjustments here. They added behavior that allows close enemy footsteps to sidechain duck the first player weapon slightly based on the direction of their enemy. They also added distance mixing for dirt bikes, which is great to hear because the dirt bike audio is kind of all over the place in my experience. And they also added dry fire sound effects for handheld weapons and vehicle weapons when you're out of ammo. So if you try to fire, you'll get a sound effect letting you know you don't have a round loaded. And then one other audio adjustment here that sounds great in my eyes is they increase the audibility of slide sounds. And I think that's a perfectly fair trade-off. If you're going to be using slides a lot, you can definitely gain some great benefits from that. But now there's more of a trade-off to doing so, as you'll be easier to hear. And that's pretty much it for the multiplayer side. Then when it comes to REDSEC, I just wanted to point out a very small handful of the most impactful changes, even though there's quite a bit more coming. One new feature is they added the ability to abandon missions in progress. They also added an assist confirmed score event. So if you assist in downing a player, you will get a notification when that player eventually bleeds out or is finished off. They also made it so in REDSEC, eliminated players can no longer place pings on the map. And they've reduced the amount of damage that you take from primary weapons when you're in the down state by 20%. So this means it's going to take generally 2 to 3 extra bullets to finish off somebody that's in a down state. And there we have it. That's finally going to wrap it up for the highlights, at least, for the Season 3 update patch notes. And overall, after reading through all of these, it looks like, once again, a bunch of great small steps in the right direction, especially when it comes to vehicle play. It looks like they're definitely making some better improvements there, not only for vehicle players themselves, but also some counterplay to vehicles, just to make things more consistent and easier to read across the board. And that all sounds good in my eyes. Now, of course, these are just my thoughts, and I'd love to hear from you guys in those comments down below. Now that we've seen the patch notes, how are you feeling about the Season 3 update that's coming next week? Are you guys really excited for this? Or maybe not so much? Is there something that you were really hoping to see in this update that wasn't there? Just let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.